Marc Kealey and I go back 40 years when Marc was working for David Peterson, another premier who called an election 3 years into his mandate. Marc has worked with MPPs and MPs, but most notably was on staff and ultimately became a very dear friend of former Prime Minister John Turner, a person Marc speaks of with great admiration, and Marc is mentioned several times in Steve Pakin's amazing book about John Turner. Today's guest at Exit 425.
In the main corridor of Exit 425.
Local politicians to connect with families.
What are some unique challenges?
Thanks very much, Steve, for having me.
Exit 425. It's where we live. Marc, welcome, and thank you for meeting me here at Exit 425.
Look, it's always great to see you, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Today, the mission is to find out what a Liberal is and how a Canadian Liberal looks at things like the economy and army, etc. Chrétien Liberals seem to be quite different from the current Trudeau Liberals. Liberals have long claimed the center of the political spectrum is theirs and claim to be Canada's natural governing party, but they aren't there right now. What does it mean to be at the center of the political spectrum?
So, that's a great question. When you talk about Chrétien Liberals, I want to make sure that we characterize this not just as under one banner, Jean Chrétien, but Chrétien represents a time and an era in Canadian politics, as he's been around since the 60s, much like John Turner. Both were elected in the early 60s, went through that, the whole cultural time of people like Laurier and Saint Laurent and Mike Pearson, all of whom played a really active role in shaping the sort of the neoliberal thought in Canada. And I guess you could say that liberalism it's established itself, particularly in Canada. I like to say this too, as the dominant organizing principle of our times here in Canada. It ensures that the gap between rich and poor has been narrowed. And we always talked about this as Liberals. We've developed and designed and put in place the social safety net. It's built to engage in terms of being a Liberal, informed and being forthright, a discussion about what the root and the branches are for the way that we live together. And that's really the essence of being a Liberal. When you look at a political spectrum and we say the center, you talked about that, you have a right wing, you have a left wing, and you have the center. And the Liberals, from the time that party politics sort of became part and parcel of Canada back in the days of Sir John A. Macdonald, the Liberal Party has always been a force that has always made people think about being in the center. And many of the things that happened in this country, Steve, could be attributed to Liberal thought and action. And I think that's really where people need to really get back to what all this means. Look, I'll even say this too. You talked about Chrétien Liberals. I think we could talk about, Tommy Douglas socialists who really were part and parcel of the formation of universal access to healthcare in this country and our healthcare system, which is really a purview of what we call the New Democrats. And frankly, the New Democrats fight for the rights of folks who may be economically challenged or who are workers. Those kinds of people, and then you have those who are on the far right, who could be characterized as more laissez-faire, free market system, all those kinds of things. But the Liberals have brought into this country really effective and good governance and things like regulation and things like effective policies that narrow that gap, and that's really, I think, over the last 9 years where we've lost that. And I have a theory about that, Steve.
So what's that theory, Marc?
Well, look, I think if you look at what happened in the 10 years after Paul Martin lost his government in those times, and look, there was a whole bunch of reasons why the Paul Martin government failed. I like Paul Martin. I think he was a terrific and a smart prime minister. He was thoughtful. He really understood politics. He understood the economy. He understood, frankly, he understood good policy as a centrist as a centrist party. But what happens invariably, it doesn't matter if it's a liberal party or a conservative party, and I'm going to make my point here. When you get to the point where you institutionalize the politics and the gimmicks start to happen, those kinds of things. So I think people catch on to that. And so over the 10 years that the Conservatives were in power, we saw a lot of institutionalization of sort of conservative thought and action, and people didn't like it. They didn't like the fact that, for example, the government was saying we're going to put judges in a position where they don't have the maneuverability to look at sentencing. That's one issue. When you look at the fact that it was so ultra partisan, I think people caught on to all of those kinds of things, Steve. And so we were, by 2014, 2015, when Justin Trudeau came onto the scene, there were a couple of things here. Number one, he was the son of a former great prime minister. And secondly, we were really tired of that sort of small and large seat conservatism that pervaded the Canadian body politic and mainstream. And people are not stupid, Steve. They see that, and they got upset about it, and they wanted to get rid of it. And I'll be honest, that was a terrible campaign for the Conservatives in 2015. And Justin Trudeau, I think he represented a whole bunch of new thinking. He got young people engaged in politics, which is what you really wanted. There's a problem. And the problem was it was 4 years of performance. And, people say, well, he's won 3 elections. No, he didn't. He won 1 election in 2015, a majority. And since 2019, both of those elections have been minorities. And sorry to say this, but they're overwhelming minorities, which means people have, for all intents and purposes, repudiated what they thought they had in 2015. So Canadians are, as I said, they're not stupid. They get to see very clearly every day how their politicians act and what it means for them. Hollow freedoms, a lot of insecurity today, and there's widespread dissatisfaction. And all of that is the new trend in politics. I'm going to say it's largely put at the feet of Justin Trudeau and the way his group centralized power in the Prime Minister's office. They engendered a gap between what I like to call institutional politics and the cultural life of people. So we don't really have a real Liberal Party like you and I knew 40 years ago. There's visceral hatred between the parties on one side of the aisle and the other, where there used to be a lot of opportunity to work together, committees, all of those things. And it's so partisan, it's so palpable. And I think as it relates to this Liberal Party and this government, they're a political establishment. And they don't speak to what I'd like to call hopes and dreams of ordinary people. And right now we're at a point where this is becoming very, very palpable. And people are seeing that in the polls. You're seeing that in this widespread dissatisfaction. But more importantly, Steve, when you try to say things in public or make your opinions known, your fears are dismissed. That you see that the government is really devoid of grand visions, and we're seeing this like crazy, and now Canadians, and I see this too because I travel this entire country, coast to coast to coast, that Canadians are less sure of themselves. It's all manifesting because guys like Trump, he takes he likes to play on people's fears and weakness. When Wilfrid Laurier was Prime Minister of this country, he said the 20th century belongs to Canada. And we really did have a good run for 100 years. And now in the first part of 2025, I thought in the 2020s or the 2000s, we've really seemed to hit a bumpy road. And when you look at that, you had Jean Chrétien for the first 3 or 4 years of the 2000s, and then you had Paul Martin for 6 years after that, and we've had 9 or almost 10 years of these Liberal governments. We can't say you blame Stephen Harper for this. I think that this has been a sort of a churn, and it's bleak. It's bleak right now, and I think we just have to understand a couple of reasons why central thinking, liberal thought, and action has to come back into politics in this country.
And so this balanced approach to thinking. And one of the prominent liberals I know, I remember him having to deal with this one person who was constantly calling about government money to support his business. And the response was, well, if it's a viable enough business idea, some bank is going to take care of it, or other people will finance it, but the government's not going to finance it. So it's kind of, I look at that as kind of the quintessential liberal approach to things, where like we can help people, but if you can help yourself, or if you should be doing things on your own, and we're not going to necessarily throw money at it. And again, that balanced approach. So is it, do you find that Canadians want their government to be in that balanced position where encourage things that can support themselves, but support those who can't support themselves?
Well, but that is the essence of sort of liberal thought and action, right? To help those who can't help themselves. And you've got a number of entities that are in the not-for-profit or the non-government side of things that ought to be encouraged to proliferate the work that they do for people. Like we've got a fantastic immigration system in this country that says to the world, you can come here and you could actually do very well here in Canada. And I think that's become part and parcel of how or why Canada is such a great place for people all over the world to want to come and live and work and prosper. But it's not about government saying we'll do everything for you. I think government's job, and I think this is where if you look at central neoliberal thinking, government's job is to regulate effectively and to ensure that there is a social safety net for those who are unavailable or who are challenged in certain ways to not be above the curve.
Mhm.
But look, we've got a problem right now where as I say, we've institutionalized this tendency where government means a lot, and this is not a problem with the Liberal Party, Stephen. This is a problem with our country.
Mhm.
And I think, and John Turner and I used to rail against this all the time. He called it a Mandarin class, and that our bureaucracies right now are bloated. And that is not the problem of bureaucracies. That's the problem of politicians who get into government and bloat bureaucracies, put too much essence or too much effort onto things like programs, these kinds of things, and that puts exactly what you said, almost like it's an addiction to either government funding or these kinds of things. And I've seen this in liberal governments where they say, you know what, the essence of Canada is really small and medium businesses, enterprises that are started by people like you and me that do well. And now all of a sudden you're seeing over the course of the 80s and the 90s, lots and lots of mergers and acquisitions that have created these very large aggregated entities who are now, for all intents and purposes, the auto sector in this country is reliant on government handouts.
Mhm.
You've got large businesses who are reliant on government handouts, and when people say, "Well, I've got a business," nope. If you want to, why don't you get into a larger sector rather than trying to be innovative or entrepreneurial in this country? And that in and of itself, I think, is being lost in what's happening right now. And a lot of that is this movement or this migration away from laissez-faire or I want to call it innovation, because that's what we should be purporting, and small business. And those are those people, innovation entrepreneurs, were really the hallmark or the essence of central liberal thinking in this country. It's gone.
Well, and studies have shown that those smaller businesses are the ones that actually generate the most jobs, and the most new jobs in most economies, because they, if you double an enterprise from 2 to 4 employees, that's significant, and that's a big deal. And if you can get 200 or 300 small businesses doubling their employees, that's a lot of people, right? And new
Well,
income, and usually people who work in small businesses, even if you're an employee and not the owner, you're a little bit more of an entrepreneur. You're working a little harder, trying a little harder. So, but yeah, well, that's great. What is it that keeps the Liberal Party typically from looking like NDP light? NDP being more to the left of the center, or what we call red Tories. So conservatives, typically right of center, who might drift into that center area and be called red Tories.
So that's a great question, and I think it's funny because that's a political issue with a capital P.
Right.
And let me tell you why. I mean, politics is about one thing: power. That's it. And so when we got elected in 2015, we thought, wow, this is great. So now let's move forward with a really a good agenda. And what we saw was, I'll just use this as a very classic example, Steve. We had the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which really opened up trade between those countries on the east side of the Pacific and those on the other side in Asia, et cetera. And so on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, we had, under the former government in the Harper days, what we called the Comprehensive Trans-Pacific Partnership, which really talked about, innovation, making sure that we had issues that were part and parcel economic. And trade is really about economics. It's not about really much anything else. But when the Liberals came in, we thought, well, let's purport this new agenda, which really is not. It's sort of, it could have been okay, but we called it progressive. And so when we looked at the notion of progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, we had issues of gender, we had issues of climate change, we had issues that put us in a position where it sort of took us out of the economics of trade and put us into the politics of identity. And I think people caught on to that pretty quickly. So that in a short period of time put us in a position where, wait a minute, what's going on here? And then the election in 2019, I think Canadians repudiated those 4 years, thinking, wait a minute, I understand what game it is, but they don't want to see progressive politics. They want to see things that actually make their lives better. And how do you make somebody's life better? You put in pathways that help you make more money, live better, and have less restriction in your life. But I understand the whole notion about regulations, but I don't understand the idea about saying that when you sign an agreement to do trade with another country, that you must, we have to engender certain, identity issues that sort of come to the bottom line. We catch on to that. So you asked the question about, how are we viewed as NDP light? If it's about power, 2019 we lost majority government, which never came back. 2019 and then again in 2021. So here we are as a Liberal Party trying to stay in power, and the only way we could do that, and you saw this happen in the province of Ontario in the years that Kathleen Wynne was premier. I need to stay in power, and the best way for me to stay in power is to get a party that would sign on for me, so that I never lose a confidence motion. And so, the idea that the Liberal Party would have a political pact with the NDP put us in the position where, for all intents and purposes, Jagmeet Singh was calling the shots. Otherwise, he would pull a trigger. And so we're not really NDP light. We're really just selfish to say we want to stay in power, and we'll do anything we can to stay in power. And the NDP have to prop us up. It could have been the Bloc Québécois. It could have been the Green Party if we had if we were shy of a number of seats. But it just happened that he said, yes, I'll take this on, but I want this as my pound of flesh, and he got it. So that put the Liberal Party in a position to say we're going to do thus and such in order to stay in power.
Mark, certain issues that really Canadians seem to care about and may not always know much about, but and generalizations are hard because, as you said, when you're getting into the middle of the spectrum, it can become very political how you actually govern. But typically, how would a liberal approach the economy?
Well, yeah, sure. That's a great question too. And if you think about it in the context of, we're not. It's not a simple answer as we're going to make sure that people have less government intervention in their lives. They have when you look at an economy is a very complicated, very dynamic place, right? So there are all sorts of issues that you have to deal with. But for all intents and purposes, if you're looking at it in the context of making sure that sort of central liberal thought and action takes over, you want to make sure that you don't dismiss the fears of people. And when people are feeling fearful of the economy, they're feeling fearful of the markets. It makes them act differently. So you want to make sure that. And Dalton McGuinty and John Turner both used to say this: your job as government is you don't have the luxury of despair. So if you're going to be so central liberal action and thought is making sure that people feel that their fears are being addressed and not dismissed. That's number one. I think the other thing about it is grand visions. We have to make ourselves think. Look, we're a resource-based economy, and I think we have to play to that strength, and we haven't been in Canada. Look, we're an innovation economy, and some of the best innovation has come out of Canada over the last 50 to 100 years. We've got some of the best education. We've got some of the best programs available. Our healthcare system, Steve, is the most unique on planet Earth, and we don't celebrate that. Liberals need to celebrate that. So if we're talking about that in the context of the economy, we got to make sure people are healthy. We got to make sure that people have a good frame of mind. We got to make sure that education is on the forefront. We got to make sure that that we put our best foot forward in the kinds of products and services that we could provide to not only our own people but to the world, and that frankly that we have good. We've got good trade opportunities between other countries because we can't just act alone. Can't say we just put a fence around Canada and have us act alone. We live on Turtle Island, and Turtle Island is a very large place that goes all the way down to the border of South America, and we've got the Arctic Ocean in the north, and all of us are completely linked, which is why we have to understand how an economy operates. Turner and I used to travel a lot down to Washington, and one of the people that we met a long time ago was the former in Bill Clinton's government back in the early '90s. But he made a comment when he said to Turner, when people in Mexico talk to me, they always give me this phrase, and I think this is something that we should steal as. And this is Lloyd Benson I'm talking about, where he said, people in Mexico say, "Don't hand me anything, show me the way." And I think that's the whole idea about this innovation agenda, this big vision agenda that's really lost right now. But that to me is all the essence of a liberal thought and action.
I like that a lot. So, and you said earlier too, the idea of creating a regulatory structure that makes sure that it's good for the society, but allows that innovation and the free reign to run, but making sure that people's fears are addressed.
Yes.
And making sure that it's good for society. So would it be fair to say that in terms of a liberal's approach to taxes, you'd be thinking more like taxes were necessary, but not necessarily taxes?
No, look at a government has to run on everybody in the entire country participating, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think I understand where you're going from, and I want to sort of grab my own agenda on that question to this effect. Over the 10 years that the Conservatives were in power in Canada between when Harper was Prime Minister, he always pushed back on the Mandarin class to say, you got to go after Canadians who aren't paying their taxes. And he said, no, I'm an economist. I know that if people have money, they'll spend it. And I think that was, for all intents and purposes, his hallmark. And I think I'm just saying this, and this is something that most liberals would never do. But I think Stephen Harper was probably one of the smartest prime ministers we had in this country. And I think in those years, there was a lot of good that had happened in this country. When Trudeau came into power in 2015, the bureaucrats at finance said, you got to go after Canadians. And you got to go, especially those people who aren't paying their taxes. And so for the next 10 years, what we saw almost in this country was this fight between Canadians and CRA. And that, to me, put a lot of fear, and it put a lot of strength into the mandarins in finance to go after every Canadian whom they thought was a tax avoider. That's not how you want to have your people work with your government. Turner used to say this too, and that's why I think that book that Peka wrote was so important, because Turner used to talk about the essence of governance is noses in and hands off, but not with politics. When you become the government of a country, you have the books, you have everything is in your power to do and to shape, and it all comes about by virtue of your philosophy. And if your culture or your philosophy is one where you create fear, you create unsure thinking and action, you're going to get people who are like we are right now, unsure. And so I think that they made a huge mistake by saying, let the Mandarin class run things like our taxation system. We there's another great line about politics: people govern people. And if you understand the concept of how people operate when they're in a position of power, if you want people to succeed, you give them the ability to succeed by saying, here's something for you that helps you raise yourself. Here's something for you that helps you move your service or your innovation forward. But if we're constantly putting our thumbs down on them and making them feel like they're under the under the thumb of a regulator, then you're gonna have a very unsure population, and we're seeing that right now. And I want to say this, Steve. The Liberal Party, the Liberal brand, does not belong to this establishment, the group of people who now have it. It belongs to Canada, and Canadians need to really look at, this is something that I think I need to get involved with. Dennis Mills just wrote a great book called From the Wooden Chair to the Green Chair, and his scream, his very loud message to Canadians was, you got to get involved. And right now, it seems that the Liberal Party has become a closed shop. The door is not open for everybody. This is not it's not yours, Steve Ray, to say it's mine. It's not mine to say it's mine. This brand belongs to everybody, and I think that's where we've really the party has really lost its way. And I hope that this leadership, I hope that the debate that's going to happen until March 9th really does open up that idea. I like to think that I'm optimistic about that, but let's see.
Okay. In the interest of time, I'm going to ask you a few more things. So just like a quick, punchy kind of response in terms of just to give the listeners an idea of, what may or may not be that balanced approach. Because again, it's been a little skewed, especially when it comes to number 7 here, energy. But on healthcare, what would be the typical Liberal approach in terms of so-called universal healthcare?
Well, what it means, ostensibly, is that you don't have to, you don't have to show your credit card to get your heartbeat checked. You don't have to. You don't have to, to jump queues and because all of that in a liberal society, it gives you the right of access. It gives you and we've perfected this in Canada. It is a sacred trust. I think a lot of it and I'll say this, and I've been railing against this too, for healthcare. We've put way too much emphasis on the administration of healthcare rather than on the delivery of healthcare. And that's what I think we need to bring back.
Love it. Immigration?
Well, we this is the number one place where people want to go. And the reason why people want to come here is because of our Charter of Rights. The fact that that is a huge boon to people saying, come here because you can all of your aspirations and your dreams could be realized here. So we've got a very robust immigration program that I think, again, we've allowed to be, for all intents and purposes, um, played, and that's something that I think we really need to take back.
Defense. I think our current Prime Minister has this image of Canadians as peacekeepers. I have a balanced view myself of Canadians being fierce warriors as well as peacekeepers, which is pretty remarkable. What would the Liberal approach be to defense in Canada?
So in defense, I think we are collaborative, but I would change the word from peacekeepers to peacemakers. And I think that speaks to your point about us being, fierce warriors. The Premier of Newfoundland, during these chats about, the President of the United States suggesting that Canada be annexed, what he's saying, or why he's saying that, is largely because we haven't been lifting like we should be on things like NATO or what I'd like to call Fortress North America. But in terms of defense, there has been a heck of a lot of blood spilled in this country from World War I and World War II, and even other skirmishes, where that we need to be recognized for the strength that we play. And we are not ladlers of soup, Steve. We are fierce warriors, and we haven't been showing that. And a lot of that comes from the fact that I like to think that our Department of National Defense ought to be a heck of a lot better at reaching out to Canadians to say, this is not a bad place for you to have a career. This is not a bad thing for us to do. Arctic sovereignty could be the purview of national defense. We need to be doing a heck of a lot more. And I challenge not only the next Prime Minister, but the Chief of Defense Staff to think about that. Because Canadians, by and large, like Americans, there's a very marked decline in recruits to our armed forces. And you know what? It's not cool. It's not cool to be in the military in this country anymore. And we got to make it cool.
And apparently there's a huge administrative backlog there, and people are waiting years to get their applications heard and dealt with. Parental rights.
So I think, again, for, if you have a child, you have the right to, for all intents and purposes, to raise your children the way you believe and you want. And I think that this is, that we now have issues where it's not just parents who are in some ways who are being compromised in terms of their right to be a parent. That the focus is on the child. The same thing with grandparents. So we don't want to make the family unit fight against each other, and I think that again is something that we really have to look at in our family courts. But I also think we have to look at it on how we address the issue of the family unit and the family dynamic.
Energy, a hot topic right now, and we're in transition from some really interesting technologies, but especially with the president's announcements in the last few days about cutting the EV emphasis in the U.S. What are your thoughts about energy and where we should be going?
Well, I think we should do a whole show on this, Steve, because I'll tell you, I'm in 100% agreement with you. When you have the folks in the Automotive Parts Manufacturing Association saying, isn't it great that we can manufacture an electric vehicle in this country? And then you look at the price tag, it's $150,000. That's not how you get people to really take hold of your electric vehicle prowess. So I don't buy that for a moment. You're talking about energy in terms of electric vehicles. They have to be charged. And I don't think that people who buy an electric vehicle today can put in a $20,000 charging station in their garage. So that's outside the purview of people who might just want to just plug it in. You can't do that. And you look at the internal combustion engine, And we are not out of the woods yet in terms of getting rid of an internal combustion engine. So I don't buy when governments have said, we've got this date by 2035, we're going to get rid of internal combustion engines. I don't see that at all. I see that they're going to keep kicking the can down the road for in terms of internal combustion engines, because how are you going to pay for roads when you're no longer getting the revenues from gas? So we got to think about those issues too. So there are all sorts of unintended consequences in that sector. But look, we're also sitting on some of the cleanest oil on planet Earth. You could say all you want, and I hear the anti-oil and gas folks all talking about the tar sands, which is their way of diminishing the effectiveness of the oil sands. But I think we've got a very rich, very ethical oil industry in this country. And what people don't understand, Steve, about energy between Canada and the United States, our grids are inextricably linked. It goes north and south, not east and west. So there's some collaboration. So on that, if I'm hearing Trump saying, I don't need Canada's oil, yes, you do. I don't need Canada's energy, yes, you do. And so we need to be, again, sure of ourselves, talking like we know what we're talking about, talking like we know where the collaboration exists and where the integration exists, and using that on our energy platform. Instead of being progressive, I think we need to be thinking very clearly about the reality of energy self-sufficiency, internal islands, Stephen. And so that's where I think we ought to focus our attention over the coming years.
Yeah, most people don't understand that Western oil in Canada does not ever make it to the east coast of Canada. That's Venezuelan and Colombia oil that takes care of our folks down east. And so that's a major flaw in our ability to take care of ourselves. And so maybe I'll have to have a chat with my friend Dan McTagg about all that too.
Sure will.
So Indigenous peoples issues. The Trudeau #1 was huge into the Indigenous peoples issues and cared very much, apparently, for them. It doesn't seem to be translating well into this current regime.
Well, I don't want to put too much of a capital P political issue on this. I'm going to say this about Indigenous people. They are sovereign nations. There are 641 Indigenous nations in this country. And I think based on the fact that Canada agreed and signed on to the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, there's a heck of a lot of responsibility that goes into that. And, when you look at whose land this is and who was here first, it's not 150 years, it's tens of thousands of years. And when you look at what all that means, and I talked about Turtle Island is what the First Nations call North America. If you look at an Indigenous person in Canada, they can go to Mexico without having to produce a passport. And so all of those, we need to be very, very sensitive to the fact as we're making decisions that they're included. Sovereignty of First Nations is part and parcel of the makeup of Canada. We've done a heck of a good job over the last 50 years. There's a lot to do. And all that means, Stephen, is that it isn't about paying lip service. I can't stand it when I hear people say, we're just going to do I'm going to read the land acknowledgement. Stop. If you don't know it in yourself and you can't put into your own thinking why it's important for us to give credit to the people who have been in this on this land for tens of thousands of years, and that we have the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People as a backstop to how we deal with Indigenous people, then I think we're going to be an abject failure on that front. So I like to think that there's an awful long way for us to go, and there's dialogue that needs to happen on both sides.
That's awesome, and good information. So, any thoughts on the federal leadership race for Canada's Liberals in terms of where you'd like to see the leadership go on that political spectrum and where it maybe needs to, where it needs to go?
Well, I did an interview recently, and somebody had asked, what do you need for the next leader of the Liberal Party? I think you need somebody who comes in, who, as I said, who who could be a heck of a lot more integrative. And more importantly, Stephen, I just think this is where, liberal thought and action happens. Uh, you mentioned Pierre Trudeau, you mentioned Jean Chrétien. And if you look at those mighty titans like John Turner, Jean Chrétien, Pierre Trudeau, we could talk about Andre Ouellette, great heavyweight titans, even John Manley, who could reach out across the other side of the political spectrum on the aisle and say, "Look, I've got this thing I want to do. Can you help me out here?" And maybe there's some, at the end of the day, politics is the art of the possible. But if the next leader could say, "You know what? It's not about us. It's about liberals. It's about all of us working together to get things." That sounds almost Pollyanna, but I think it's doable because they used to do that back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. We all talked about. Mulroney was a great prime minister that way, because he'd write a note in the House of Commons and say, "Go give that to so and so on the other side of the aisle. I got this idea that I want to pass by." That doesn't happen today. Liberals don't talk to conservatives. Conservatives don't talk to liberals. They don't even like each other. And this is a terrible way for Canada to be, especially when we've always had this sort of centralized thinking, and it just happened to be the purview of the Liberal Party. We need to get that back. So the next leader really needs to say, "Okay, we can't go back 10 years. We can't do that. We now have to take, okay, here's 2025 March. Let's move forward. Here's what I want to do." And that person better be thinking everything that I've been talking about dismissing fears, about making sure that people are more sure of themselves by virtue of policy and the ability to be, how I've always said it, making sure that people don't see that as a government you have the luxury of despair.
It sounds like a mandate for all political leadership, right? And what you just said about reaching out and working with the people across the aisle. Our federal legislative body, the elected legislative body, is the House of Commons. It's worthy of note that the bell that signals them to come to a vote is called the division bell. So it indicates the division, but that's all we're seeing now. We're not seeing any of the Commons part, where they're working to work together for the good of Canadians. And so maybe that has to be something that all our politicians need to work on a lot more, because used to talk about behind the curtain, right? And the lobby areas in the House of Commons area, behind the green curtains where the MPs sit. And people didn't realize that often people of all different parties would be sitting back there talking to each other and working on something, or clarifying something, or even making dinner plans. Who knows? But it was that work behind the curtain that was almost more important than what was going on in front of the cameras in the House of Commons.
Wow. I think you're absolutely right. And you know this better than anybody too. In the House of Commons, it's theater. So, all of the anything that you need to make an agreement on is not done in public. So all of that that's why they have that curtain. So you could be behind there with somebody that might be from another party that you wouldn't see, so that when you do get it, because you've seen this happen too. You're going to say this, and I'll respond this way, because that's good theater. But at the end of the day, we've made this deal happen, and we work together to do it, and that happens, everywhere in parliamentary democracies. But we use this phrase a lot in when it comes to things like Parliament, about contempt. And I think Canadians need to get that the essence of what contempt means, and they should start throwing this around more. I think what's happening right now is contempt of Parliament, when you have the inability for the governing party to reach out to the opposition, whomever that is. So that's contemptuous behavior, and I think that Canadians need to get a little more understanding of the use of the word contempt as it relates to their Parliament. The use of the Parliament, and John Turner always said this, Parliament comes from the word parler, to speak. And if you say you're discounting my ability to speak, that's contemptuous behavior. So I think people should be saying, no, you have the right to be doing this. And as my elected official, I expect that you would use all of your power to make sure that there's a lack of contempt. I want to say this too. You go back to your point about what the next leader should say. One of the things that people don't really understand about our parliament is the effectiveness of a Senate. And we've been playing politics with our Senate for a long, long time. We've got this program right now where independent senators are now sort of taking over in the majority. And they say, I don't care what the government wants. I go down this path. I say to anybody who wants to come in as the leader of the Liberal Party, bring back the independent senators into the Liberal fold. Bring back independent senators into the Conservative fold so that they're all part of your caucus. That's the benefit of having a Senate, so that you have that connectivity between the House of Commons or the Senate and that other place they like to call it. We need to do that, and we need to bring that back. And I'm pushing that like crazy right now, Steve.
Yeah, and that's good. So more people taking like the genuine responsibility for what their job was supposed to be. And the Senate was established as a chamber of sober second thought.
Exactly.
Lots of jokes about the sober part, but that second thought, but to have it there as a meaningful sounding board for the House of Commons, and that's valuable. But the whole purpose of my Exit 425 podcast and anything I do is to try and engage more people. And so it sounds like all this will work better when we expect more from our politicians, right? And hold them to a higher standard.
Yeah.
And, that goes with Amy Klobuchar's comments, quoting John F. Kennedy about how all of us are holding office, right?
Yes.
And it's every individual's responsibility to play a role in this, play a role in our government. And the politics is difficult, but John F. Kennedy said, even if you don't like it, you still have this role to play as holding office, and you are holding office, and you need to hold the people who are elected to account. And so I think all of that will work better. The whole system will work better in Canada if we reclaim that power as individuals. And it's hard. It'll take a long time, and we need the right politicians to respect that power. But I have this really silly belief that it can happen.
I think that's admirable. You may use this as an example. It is unconscionable that a political party or a leader of a political party would suggest to Canadians that first past the post is gone. I'm going to try to put a new system in place for people to vote. That's not your job. You don't tell me how I get to vote for you. That's me as a voter to say, if we want to have a change in our electoral process, then we have to talk about that as Canadians. It's not you as an elected official to tell me how I vote for you. And I think Canadians have to really be bloody-minded about this, Steve, that there are some ways, you made the point very, very clear in your last comments, that we have a collective responsibility to make sure that the way we're governed is our it's our collective choice. And you know what? That could mean consensus. That could mean a whole bunch of different ideas coming together, but to form a collective. So I'm not putting that into the hands of elected officials. No way.
People don't know this, but you and I worked together for Renee Sutton's many, many decades ago. And we, among other things, and we actually engaged Steve Paikin to help us a little bit. But we ran something called the Citizens Forum around the time of the evaluation of our Constitution, back when the Blue Jays were winning World Series. So we, maybe we need something like that again.
Well, I think you could do that, and I think you could use your podcast because you've got some traction, right? And people like that. You've got this great sense about you, Steve. I think maybe if you wanted to have a podcast in public where we could engage, some ideas from people, a wide cross section of people, I'd be really happy to help you do that because I think you have, I think this is is something that Canadians are lacking. Right now, if I say this is what's going on, I'm accused of being bleak. No. Or my fears are dismissed. No. I think that Canadians want to go back to how can I purport a grand vision or help to create a grand vision? That's the essence of a good democracy. And frankly, it's not just the purview of the Liberal Party. Everybody in politics on every side of the spectrum needs to be considered and together considered. And to me, that's the essence of Parliament. And so I'm encouraging people get involved. We need, really good candidates to seek Liberal office, not somebody who just says, I want to run to be a celebrity. I think we really need to make sure that people are in this business because their intention is to make this a better place for everybody.
What a great place to finish. And I sure appreciate that. So, Marc, thank you so much for joining me today at Exit 425. You've already answered what people can do to learn more, to be more engaged. Is there anything else you'd like to add about what people could do to maybe learn more about, Liberals, or just how to be involved in government, period?
Well, every political party has a head office. And I think I would encourage people, look up the Liberal Party of Canada, look up the Conservative Party of Canada, look up the Green Party of Canada, look up the New Democrat Party of Canada, look up, whatever party is there that attracts you, and get involved. We're going to be going into an election, and a federal election, in probably 2 months' time. And I think it's really important that people say, that I say to people right now, not voting is on vogue, which is not the right way to do this. I think people should be saying, I want to not only put my own stamp on this, but I need to get involved. And if it's a political party that's attracting me, I think that you should go down that path and see for yourself. But don't do saying no, I'm not going to vote as an action. I think we need to get involved.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure,
Exit
Steve.
425. It's where we live. It's where we vote.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Exit 425. Please like and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. Our mission is to provide substantial information and education that goes where you want, because it's where we live. Exit 425 is a production of Studio 38 Audio, copyright 2024. My name is Steve Ray. If you have any questions or would like more information about Exit 425, join our Exit 425 Facebook group, like the Facebook page, check out Instagram, Medium, LinkedIn, X, and TikTok, or email me at exit425401@gmail.com. Exit 425. It's where we live.